The cabin door slammed shut with a hollow metallic thud, and for a brief second, the private jet felt like a sealed courtroom where judgment had already been passed. "Ma'am, I need you to switch seats. Now." The voice was firm, clipped, practiced. It cut clean through the low hum of the auxiliary power unit. Conversations died mid-breath. A crystal glass stopped halfway to someone's lips. Somewhere behind the cockpit door, a switch clicked sharp and final. Evelyn Carter did not look up right away. She sat still in the forward-facing leather seat, hands folded loosely over a dark canvas tote resting on her lap. The seat was wide, cream-colored, softened by years of use and money. Outside the oval window, late afternoon light slid across the tarmac at Westchester County Airport, pale gold reflecting off wet concrete. "Ma'am," the voice repeated closer now. "You're in the wrong seat." Evelyn slowly raised her eyes. Captain Robert Hale stood in the aisle, tall and squared, his uniform pressed so sharply it looked armored. 64 years old. Silver hair trimmed within regulation. Shoulders still carrying the muscle memory of command. He did not lean. He did not smile. His hands rested behind his back. Fingers interlaced the stance of a man who had spent decades being obeyed. Behind him, just over his right shoulder, Linda Moore hovered near the galley entrance. 48, lead flight attendant. Her lips were pressed, thin eyes, darting once toward Evelyn, then away. She knew that look. The moment before, something went wrong. Evelyn met the captain's stare. Her expression was calm, unreadable. No surprise, no apology. "This is my seat," she said. Her voice was low, steady, textured by age and certainty. Not loud enough to challenge. Not soft enough to yield. A flicker crossed Robert's face. Annoyance quickly masked. "I'm sure you believe that," he replied. "But this aircraft operates under a specific seating protocol. That seat is reserved. Reserved for whom Evelyn asked." The question landed heavier than it sounded. Robert exhaled through his nose. He did not answer immediately. His eyes flicked down briefly to the tote on her lap. Canvas. No logo, no leather, no assistant hovering nearby. No visible markers that his mind had learned to associate with the people who usually sat there. "For the primary client," he said at last. "And you're holding up departure?" Around them, the cabin remained frozen. Two men in tailored suits across the aisle exchanged a glance. One of them shifted in his seat, the leather creaking softly. Further back, someone cleared their throat, a small sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet. Evelyn glanced once toward the cockpit door, then back at Robert. "I boarded with the manifest," she said. "My name is on it." Robert's jaw tightened. "Yes." "I saw the name," he said, "and I'm addressing the seating discrepancy." Discrepancy. The word was surgical, clean. It stripped the moment of humanity and turned it into a procedural error. Linda took a half step forward. "Captain," she said carefully, her voice gentle but edged. "Her name is listed as Evelyn Carter. Seat assignment." Robert lifted a hand without turning his head. I've got it, Linda." She stopped. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her blazer. She glanced at Evelyn again, an apology flickering in her eyes, then retreated a fraction, swallowed by her own silence. Evelyn watched the exchange without comment. She shifted slightly, the canvas tote brushing against the armrest. The movement was small, but Robert noticed it. His eyes followed it instinctively, as if expecting something to spill out. It did not. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice, "we're already behind schedule. I need you to move to the alternate seat in the rear section so we can depart." Alternate seat, rear section. The words hung between them. Evelyn turned her head and looked down the length of the cabin, past the polished wood paneling, past the recessed lighting that glowed warm and forgiving, past the quiet faces pretending not to stare. She saw the other seat, narrower, closer to the galley, near the lavatory door, a seat meant for convenience, not for presence. She looked back at Robert. "Is there a safety issue?" she asked. Robert hesitated. "Just a beat. Too short for anyone else to notice, but long enough to matter." "No," he said. "This is an operational decision." Operational. Another word that buried judgment beneath process. Evelyn nodded slowly. Inside her chest, something tightened. Not anger. Not fear. Recognition. She had sat across tables from men like this for decades. Men who believed authority was something you wore. Men who confused order with righteousness. Men who never imagined the person they were dismissing might be the one measuring them. She stood. The motion was unhurried. The seat exhaled softly as she rose. The cabin seemed to breathe again, sound rushing back in small, awkward increments. Someone shifted. Someone else swallowed. Evelyn lifted the tote from her lap and held it at her side. "I'll move," she said. Robert's shoulders eased just a fraction. Satisfaction, quick and quiet. "Thank you," he said. "We'll get you settled." She stepped into the aisle, passing him close enough that he could smell the faint, clean scent of soap on her coat. No perfume, no excess. Just presence. As she walked toward the rear seat, eyes followed her. Some curious, some relieved. One woman near the window looked away entirely, as if ashamed of her own relief. Linda watched Evelyn sit down the narrower seat, creaking under her weight. She leaned in, slightly lowering her voice. "Can I get you some water?" Evelyn shook her head. "I'm fine." Her gaze drifted forward, past the curtain, toward the cockpit door, that now felt heavier, more sealed than before. Up front, Robert turned back toward the cockpit. His stride was confident again, boots striking the floor with rhythm. He paused just inside the doorway and glanced down at the tablet mounted beside his seat. The manifest glowed softly. Names. Seats. Codes. Evelyn Carter. He stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. Then he dismissed it. The engines began to spool their low growl, vibrating through the floor, through the seat frame, through Evelyn's spine. Outside, the jet eased forward, tires rolling over wet pavement, carrying with it a cabin full of assumptions. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. This was not the first test. It would not be the last. She rested her hand on the canvas tote fingers, brushing the corner of a slim metal edge inside. Her breathing remained steady, even as the plane turned toward the runway. Somewhere between the hum of the engines and the quiet certainty settling in her chest, Evelyn made a decision. She would let this go exactly as far as it needed to. No further. And no less. The jet lifted from the runway with a smooth, disciplined surge, the kind of takeoff designed to reassure people who believed control was the same thing as safety. Evelyn felt the pressure settle into her back as the wheels left the ground. The vibration traveled through the narrow seat, through the metal frame, into her bones. She kept her gaze forward, unfocused, listening to the sounds most passengers ignored. The pitch of the engines, the timing of the climb, the faint rattle in the overhead panel that suggested a latch slightly out of alignment. Up front, Captain Robert Hale sat taller, now hands steady on the controls. The moment of friction in the cabin had already begun to fade in his mind, filed away as a minor inconvenience resolved. This was where he belonged. The cockpit. The view ahead. Instruments glowing green and amber, obedient and precise. "Positive rate," Daniel Brooks said from the right seat. "Gear up," Robert replied. Daniel moved efficiently, his movements economical. 41 years old. Calm eyes. He had noticed the exchange earlier, every word of it, though he had said nothing. He had learned long ago when to speak and when to observe. As the aircraft climbed through the low cloud layer, Robert exhaled and leaned back slightly. The familiar rhythm returned. The world simplified into airspeed and altitude vectors and margins. Behind the cockpit door, the cabin atmosphere shifted. The curtain separating the forward section from the rear was half drawn enough to suggest privacy without fully sealing the space. The two men in suits resumed their conversation in muted tones, voices low and confidential. Somewhere further back, a phone buzzed briefly, then went silent. Linda moved through the aisle with practiced grace, her heels barely making a sound against the carpet. She paused near Evelyn's seat, adjusted a vent, then continued on, but not before their eyes met again. Linda's expression was different now. Concern had replaced restraint. Evelyn gave her a small nod. Nothing more. Linda swallowed and moved on. Evelyn rested her head lightly against the headrest and closed her eyes. She did not sleep. Her mind worked measured, deliberate. She replayed the exchange not emotionally, but structurally. The assumptions, the shortcuts, the moment Robert had chosen order over verification. She had seen this pattern everywhere. Boardrooms, government hearings, factory floors, authority calcified into habit, habit calcified into harm. The seatbelt sign chimed softly. The jet leveled off. "Ladies and gentlemen." Robert's voice came over the intercom, smooth and assured. "We've reached our cruising altitude. Flight time to Palm Springs will be approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." Evelyn opened her eyes. 5 hours and 20 minutes. Plenty of time. She reached into the canvas tote and removed a slim phone, its surface matte and unbranded. The screen lit at her touch, displaying a simple interface. No icons, no clutter. Just text. She typed slowly, deliberately. Confirm operational oversight status. Real-time audit. Priority level amber. She paused, then added a second line. Observe crew decision-making under non-critical pressure. She sent the message and slipped the phone back into the bag. Up front, a soft chime sounded in the cockpit. Daniel glanced at the auxiliary display. "That's odd," he said quietly. Robert did not look up. What has just got a system query from Ops? Daniel replied. Routine audit flag, looks like. Robert frowned slightly. We didn't schedule one. Daniel shrugged. Could be random. Robert dismissed it with a wave of his hand. They can audit all they want. Everything's by the book. Daniel nodded, but his eyes lingered on the display for a moment longer. In the cabin, Linda stopped at the forward galley, her back to the passengers. She leaned her hands against the counter, shoulders tense. She had flown with Robert for years. She knew his strengths. She also knew his blind spots. She remembered the way he had looked at Evelyn, not with fear, not even with anger, with certainty. That was what unsettled her. She poured herself a small cup of water, took a sip, then set it down untouched. When she turned, Evelyn was watching her. Linda hesitated, then approached again, lowering her voice. I just wanted to say if there's anything you need, please let me know. Evelyn studied her face, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the professionalism held together by effort. Thank you, Evelyn said. I appreciate that. Linda nodded and straightened as if bracing herself for something she could not yet name. Time passed in quiet increments. The jet cut through the sky, leaving the last traces of weather behind. Sunlight poured through the windows, now bright and unforgiving. The cabin warmed. Robert sipped his coffee and scanned the instruments. He felt good, in control. He thought briefly of the woman in the rear seat, then dismissed her again. The world was full of people who misunderstood how things worked. Daniel shifted in his seat. You ever notice, he said carefully, how sometimes the smallest calls end up being the biggest ones? Robert snorted. That's just hindsight talking. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe. Another chime sounded. This time Robert looked. The screen displayed a message from operations. Confirming owner presence on current flight. Request acknowledgement. Robert stared at it. Owner presence. His first instinct was irritation. He did not like surprises. His second was dismissal. North Sky had changed hands recently, but ownership was a corporate abstraction. Boards, trusts, lawyers. Probably just paperwork, he said. A name on a list. Daniel did not respond immediately. You want me to acknowledge? Daniel asked. Robert hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Clear it. Daniel tapped the screen. Acknowledgement sent. In the cabin, Evelyn felt the subtle change before anyone else did. The shift in air. The almost imperceptible tightening of the atmosphere. She looked toward the cockpit door, then down at her bag. She thought of her father, a man who had taught her to read rooms before she ever read contracts. Watch who speaks. Watch who interrupts. Watch who assumes. She thought of the countless times she had been underestimated, not because of lack of competence, but because of presence. The jet cruised on. Minutes later, Linda's tablet vibrated in her hand. She glanced at it and felt her stomach drop. She looked up toward the cockpit, then back at Evelyn. Evelyn met her gaze steadily. Linda walked forward, heart pounding, and knocked lightly on the cockpit door. Robert turned. What is it? Linda stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I just got a message from Ops, she said. Her voice was controlled, but only just. They're asking to speak with the passenger seated in the rear section. Evelyn Carter. Robert frowned. Why they didn't say. They said it's time sensitive. Robert felt a ripple of unease. Time sensitive, how Linda swallowed. They used the word ownership. The cockpit fell silent. Daniel's hands stilled on the controls. Robert stared at Linda, then at the manifest glowing quietly on the screen. Evelyn Carter, the name he had dismissed. "Get them on the line," Robert said. Linda nodded and stepped out, her pulse racing. As the door closed, Robert leaned back slowly, the confidence that had carried him through decades of flight beginning just barely to erode. Behind the curtain, Evelyn sat very still. The engines droned on, indifferent, as the story shifted beneath them. Gravity-steady consequences gathering altitude. The satellite phone rang once, sharp and deliberate, a sound that did not belong to routine flight operations. Robert stared at it for half a second too long before lifting the handset. "Captain Hale," he said, his voice still steady, still practiced. The reply came immediately, clipped, unmistakable. "This is Thomas Keegan, North Sky Aviation Operations." Robert's grip tightened. "Go ahead." "Captain, we need to confirm the status of Ms. Evelyn Carter on your aircraft." The words landed with weight. Not a request, a verification. "She's on board," Robert said. "Seated in the rear section." A pause followed. Not dead air. Deliberate silence, the kind used by people who already know the answer. "Is she secure?" Keegan asked. "Secure." Daniel glanced sideways, his expression unreadable. Robert felt something cold slide down his spine. "Yes," Robert said. "There's no safety issue," Good Keegan replied. "Because Ms. Carter is the majority owner of North Sky Aviation, including the aircraft you are currently operating." Her presence was intentional. "This call is being logged." Robert did not speak. His mind raced, searching for a procedural foothold, some narrow ledge of explanation. Majority owner. On board. Intentional. "You were informed of the ownership transfer last week," Keegan continued. "The briefing memo was sent to all senior flight crew." Robert's mouth felt dry. He remembered the email. He remembered skimming it. Legal language. Corporate transitions. He had assumed it was background noise, nothing that would touch his cockpit. "We are requesting that Miss Carter be informed that operations is now aware of the seating adjustment," Keegan said. "She asked us to observe, not intervene." "Observe." Robert swallowed. Understood. The line went dead. For a moment, the cockpit felt smaller, the panels closer, the air heavier. Daniel broke the silence. "You want me to take the controls?" Robert shook his head automatically. No, not yet. But his hands were no longer resting easily. They hovered uncertain above the console. Behind the cockpit door, Linda stood frozen, her tablet pressed against her chest. She had heard enough. Ownership. Intentional. Observe. She turned slowly and looked down the aisle. Evelyn Carter sat exactly as she had before. Back straight, hands folded, eyes forward. The curtain was open now, offering no barrier, no illusion of separation. Evelyn met Linda's gaze and gave a slight nod. Permission. Linda walked toward her, each step measured. The cabin felt impossibly quiet. Even the men in suits had stopped pretending not to listen. "Ms. Carter," Linda said softly, "operations would like a word." Evelyn rose smoothly as if she had been expecting this moment all along. She adjusted the strap of her tote, then followed Linda forward. Robert watched her enter the cockpit through the open door. Up close, she looked different. Not larger, not imposing, just precise. Her eyes moved once, taking in the instruments, the displays, the two men who believed this space belonged to them. "Captain," she said. Robert stood. Not fully, not at attention, somewhere between. "Ms. Carter," he replied. Linda handed Evelyn the handset. Their fingers brushed briefly. Linda felt a strange surge of relief. Evelyn lifted the phone. "This is Evelyn." Keegan's voice softened immediately. "Ms. Carter, thank you for your patience." Evelyn glanced at Robert, then at Daniel. "I'm listening. We've confirmed everything on our end," Keegan said. "No irregularities in flight operations. We'll defer to your judgment." "Good," Evelyn replied. "Continue observing." She handed the phone back to Linda, who retreated quickly, heart pounding. Evelyn turned to Robert. "I imagine you have questions," she said. Robert nodded stiffly. "Yes, I do." "Then ask them," Evelyn replied. He hesitated. Pride warred with instinct. "Why didn't you say anything?" Evelyn studied him. Would it have mattered? The question hung in the air. "You didn't ask who I was?" She continued. "You told me where I belonged." Robert felt heat rise to his face. "I was enforcing protocol." "No," Evelyn said quietly. "You were enforcing comfort." Daniel shifted in his seat, eyes fixed straight ahead. Evelyn stepped back, giving the cockpit space again. "I'm going to return to my seat," she said. "Please continue the flight." Robert watched her go, every step measured, every movement controlled. She sat back down in the narrower seat, without complaint, without drama. The engines droned on. Minutes passed. Then more. Robert's thoughts churned. He replayed the moment he had chosen expedience over verification, the hand he had raised to silence Linda, the certainty in his voice. He cleared his throat. "Daniel," he said. "Yes, sir. You have the aircraft." Daniel looked at him. Really looked. Then nodded. "I have the aircraft." Robert stood slowly, feeling the weight of his years, his rank, his assumptions. He stepped out of the cockpit and walked toward Evelyn. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. He stopped in front of her. "Ms. Carter." She looked up. "I owe you an apology," Robert said. The words tasted unfamiliar. "For making a decision without full information." Evelyn regarded him for a long moment. "Apologies are easy," she said. "Corrections are harder." "What would you have me do?" Robert asked. Evelyn gestured toward the cockpit. "Finish the flight as a passenger." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Subtle, unmistakable. Robert stiffened. "I'm still the captain." "For now," Evelyn replied. "But command is not a costume. It's a responsibility." He hesitated, then nodded. Slowly. He moved past her toward the seat she had vacated earlier. The narrow one. The one near the galley. Linda watched eyes wide as Robert sat down. His shoulders no longer filled the space the way they had before. Evelyn rose and walked forward, reclaiming the wide leather seat without ceremony. She adjusted the armrest, and looked out the window. The jet continued westward, unchanged in course, altered entirely in meaning. In the cockpit, Daniel flew with steady hands, aware that something fundamental had shifted behind him. And in the cabin, the passengers sat quietly absorbing the lesson unfolding at 35,000 feet as power revealed itself not in volume, but in restraint. The jet settled into its long cruise, the sky outside a vast, pale blue sheet that felt endless and indifferent. Robert sat rigidly in the narrow seat near the galley knees, angled awkwardly, shoulders brushing the partition each time the aircraft adjusted its course. The hum of the engines sounded louder back here, less refined, a constant reminder of distance from the cockpit. He stared straight ahead, hands folded in his lap, the gold bands on his cuffs, catching the light in brief, mocking flashes. Across the aisle, Linda pretended to organize a cabinet that had already been organized twice. Her movements were precise, but unnecessary. She kept glancing at Robert, then quickly away, as if afraid the moment would shatter if acknowledged too directly. Evelyn sat forward in the wide leather seat, posture, relaxed gaze outward. From here, the wing stretched clean and confident against the sky. She watched the sun slide along the polished surface, her reflection faint in the glass. She felt no triumph, no rush, only clarity. In the cockpit, Daniel flew with a careful steadiness, his breathing slow, his attention fixed. The aircraft responded to his touch without resistance. He had waited years for a moment like this, though not like this. Not with a former captain sitting silent behind a curtain of consequence. Everything stable, Daniel said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The cabin intercom remained silent. Time expanded. Robert shifted slightly, the seat protesting with a dull creak. Pain crept into his lower back, radiating outward. He clenched his jaw. He had endured worse discomforts in his career. Long missions, emergency descents, nights without sleep. This was different. This was visible. A man in a charcoal suit a few rows forward leaned toward his companion and whispered, "That's him, isn't it?" His companion nodded without answering. Robert heard nothing. Or perhaps he heard everything and chose not to process it. His mind replayed small moments from earlier in the flight. Linda's unfinished sentence, the way Evelyn had asked if there was a safety issue, the manifest glowing quietly on the screen. He had not been reckless. That was the thought he clung to. He had been efficient. He had maintained order. But efficiency without curiosity was just blindness wearing a uniform. Linda finally approached Evelyn's seat, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of water. She offered one tentatively. "Thank you," Evelyn said, taking it. Linda hesitated. "If you need anything else," Evelyn turned to face her fully. "You did your job," she said. "That matters." Linda felt her throat tighten. She nodded quickly and stepped back, composure cracking just enough to let relief through. Across the aisle, Robert watched the exchange from the corner of his eye. He looked away immediately, as if caught in a private moment he had no right to witness. Minutes later, the cockpit door opened softly. Daniel stepped into the cabin, careful not to draw attention, though his presence did exactly that. He stopped beside Evelyn's seat. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I wanted to let you know we're making excellent time. Weather ahead is clear. Evelyn looked up. Thank you, Daniel. He hesitated. And for what it's worth, I appreciate how you handled earlier. Evelyn studied him. Why? Daniel considered his words. Because you didn't make it about winning. She nodded once. Winning is loud. Building is quiet. Daniel returned to the cockpit, his steps lighter. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cabin. The men in suits grew restless, checked their watches, then their phones. No messages came. The silence stretched. Robert's breathing slowed. His thoughts turned inward unwillingly. He remembered his first instructor, a man who had drilled one lesson above all others. Never assume. Verify. Always. Somewhere along the way, Robert had replaced verification with instinct. Instinct with habit. Habit with certainty. He shifted again, the seat biting into his spine. His reflection stared back at him from the glossy surface of the galley wall, distorted and unfamiliar. A man out of place. Evelyn finished her water and set the glass aside. She reached into her tote and removed the slim phone again. This time she scrolled through a series of reports, her eyes moving quickly. Names, time-stamps, internal notes. One name appeared repeatedly. Robert Hale. She closed the file and rested the phone on her knee. The cabin lights adjusted automatically as the afternoon faded. Soft amber replaced white. The mood shifted with it, quieter, heavier. Linda announced meal service in a calm, professional tone. Trays were distributed. The rustle of packaging filled the air. Robert declined when Linda offered him a tray. "I'm fine," he said. Evelyn accepted hers. She ate slowly, thoughtfully, savoring the normalcy of the act. Halfway through the meal, a soft chime sounded from the cockpit. Daniel's voice came over the intercom, steady. "We'll be beginning our descent in approximately 40 minutes. A ripple of movement followed. Belts adjusted. Seats straightened. Evelyn stood once more, drawing eyes despite herself. She walked down the aisle toward Robert and stopped beside his seat. He looked up, startled. "Captain Hale," she said. He straightened reflexively. "Ms. Carter, you asked earlier what you could do," she continued. "This is it." She gestured lightly toward the cockpit. "When we land, you will step off this aircraft as a pilot. You will re-enter the world as a man being evaluated." Robert swallowed. "Am I being dismissed?" "Not yet," Evelyn replied. "I don't believe in public executions. I believe in records. What happens next?" he asked. "That depends on what we uncover," she said. "And how honest you are when asked," he nodded slowly. "I understand." Evelyn held his gaze for a moment longer, then moved away, returning to her seat. The descent began smoothly, the angle gentle, controlled. Daniel guided the aircraft with care, aware of the weight of the moment pressing against the controls. Outside, the land rose to meet them, grids of light forming highways threading through darkness. The jet aligned with the runway engines, throttling back, the sound deepening. Robert closed his eyes briefly as the landing gear deployed the familiar thud, resonating through the cabin. It felt final. The plane touched down cleanly, tires gripping the runway with a muted roar. Applause did not follow. This was not that kind of flight. As the aircraft taxied toward the private terminal, Robert remained seated unmoving, Linda stood near the door, hands clasped, waiting. Evelyn rose last. She gathered her tote and walked forward, stopping briefly at the cockpit door. "Well done, Daniel," she said. That was a steady landing. Daniel's smile was small but genuine. "Thank you." She turned toward the cabin door. Outside, vehicles waited, headlights glowing against the evening. Linda opened the door, cool air rushing in. Evelyn stepped onto the stairs without looking back. Robert remained seated, watching her disappear into the night. The weight of the sky no longer his, to command the silence, finally answering every assumption he had ever made. The night air hit Robert Hale like a reprimand, cold and unyielding, carrying the smell of jet fuel and wet asphalt. He stepped off the stairs, last slower than the others. Boots, heavy, posture stiff. The private terminal at Palm Springs glowed ahead. Glass walls lit from within, but the space between the aircraft and the building felt longer than it should have. Each step echoed too loudly in his ears. Evelyn Carter stood a short distance away, speaking with two men in dark jackets. Their stance was attentive, respectful. One held a tablet. The other listened without interrupting. No raised voices. No gestures meant for show. Robert recognized one of them. Michael Reeves, Director of Flight Operations, a man who rarely appeared in person unless something had gone wrong. Linda passed Robert quietly, eyes forward, shoulders squared. She did not look at him. Daniel followed, pausing just long enough to meet Robert's gaze. There was no triumph there, only gravity. Robert stopped beside the aircraft, the tail number catching the light above him. He had flown this machine dozens of times, knew its moods, trusted its responses. Tonight it felt like a witness. "Captain Hale." Evelyn's voice cut through the ambient noise, calm and precise. She turned to face him. Michael Reeves stepped back, giving them space. "Ms. Carter," Robert said. He removed his cap without thinking and held it at his side. "Walk with me," Evelyn said. They moved away from the plane together, their footsteps synchronized despite everything. The terminal doors loomed ahead. Robert felt every eye on them, though no one stared openly. "You were a good pilot," Evelyn said, not looking at him. The statement landed unexpectedly. Robert's jaw tightened. "Was." She corrected. "Skill doesn't vanish because judgment fails." They stopped beneath a canopy. The lights overhead hummed softly. "Then why am I here?" Robert asked. "Because skill without accountability becomes dangerous," Evelyn replied. She turned to face him fully now. "I didn't board that aircraft to expose you. I boarded it to understand the culture I purchased." Robert absorbed the words. "Purchased. Culture." "You tested us," he said. "I observed," she replied. "You tested yourselves." He nodded slowly. "I made assumptions. Yes. I didn't mean harm." "Intent is not impact," Evelyn said. "And in aviation, impact is everything." Michael approached, tablet in hand. "Ms. Carter, we're ready." Evelyn nodded. "Captain Hale will accompany us." The conference room inside the terminal was smaller than Robert expected. Clean lines, neutral colors, no windows. A place designed for decisions, not comfort. Michael took a seat across from Robert. Another woman joined them. older, sharp-eyed. Legal counsel. Robert recognized the type immediately. Evelyn remained standing. "This is not a disciplinary hearing," she said. "Not yet." "This is a record." Michael tapped the tablet, and a timeline appeared on the screen mounted on the wall. Boarding, seating adjustment, manifest review, cockpit communication, Captain Hale. Michael said, "Did you verify the passenger manifest prior to departure?" "Yes," Robert replied. "Did you note the presence of the owner?" "I noted the name," Robert said. "I did not connect it to ownership." "Why not?" Robert hesitated. The room waited. "Because I believed ownership would present differently," he said at last. Silence followed. Heavy. Unforgiving. Evelyn's voice cut through it. "Define differently." Robert met her gaze. With staff, with visibility, with signals. And when those signals were absent, Evelyn asked. "I defaulted to hierarchy," he said. "Your hierarchy," she corrected. Michael continued. "Did you consult ground operations before reassigning the seat? No. Did you document the decision? None. Did you consider alternative explanations for the discrepancy?" Robert exhaled. "No." Each answer stripped something from him. Not his dignity, his armor. The legal counsel finally spoke. "Captain Hale, do you understand that your actions exposed the company to reputational risk?" "Yes." "And operational risk?" "Yes." Evelyn raised a hand gently. "That's enough." She sat across from Robert, now folding her hands on the table. "I want to know something," she said. "When you told me to move, did it feel justified?" Robert thought of the moment. The certainty. The ease. "Yes," he said quietly. "At the time." "Why?" He looked down at his cap. "Because it restored order." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "Or because it protected your comfort?" The distinction cut deeper than accusation. Robert swallowed. "Both." She nodded once. "Honesty matters." Michael cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter, given the circumstances, protocol would suggest immediate suspension pending review." Evelyn considered this. And what would that accomplish? Michael hesitated. "It demonstrates accountability." "Symbolic accountability," Evelyn said. "I'm interested in structural accountability." She turned back to Robert. "I'm not firing you tonight." Robert looked up sharply. "I'm grounding you," she continued. "Effective immediately. You will surrender your credentials pending a full review. You will participate in that review. Fully." "Yes, ma'am," Robert said. "You will also attend training," she added. "Not technical, human." He nodded again. "Understood." "And when the review concludes," Evelyn said, her tone, "even I will decide whether you return to the cockpit." Michael looked surprised. The legal counsel frowned slightly. Evelyn met their expressions without flinching. "North Sky will not become a company that discards experience without examining failure, nor will it become a company that protects authority at the expense of judgment." She stood. "We're done here." Outside the desert, night stretched wide and quiet. The hum of traffic from a distant road carried faintly. Evelyn paused before leaving, turning back to Robert one last time. "You asked earlier what you could do," she said. "This is still it. Learn." Robert watched her walk away, the click of her heels measured unhurried. No victory in her stride. No anger. Only resolve. Michael approached Robert and extended a hand. "I'll need your badge." Robert unclipped it from his jacket and placed it in Michael's palm. The metal felt colder than he expected. As Robert stepped out into the night, the terminal lights dimming behind him, he realized something with unsettling clarity. He had spent his career believing that control came from command. Tonight, he had learned it came from responsibility. And responsibility once lost was not reclaimed by force, but by reckoning. Morning came quietly over the desert, a pale wash of light creeping across the hotel room walls, long before the city fully woke. Robert Hale sat at the small desk by the window, still dressed in the same shirt he had worn the night before. His jacket hung neatly over the chair. His captain's cap lay upside down on the desk brim, facing the wall, as if even it had turned away. He had not slept. The silence of the room was unfamiliar. No pre-flight checklist, no weather briefings, no radio chatter humming beneath his thoughts. Just the soft whir of the air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic beginning its slow crawl through Palm Springs. He stared at his hands. They looked the same. Steady. Capable. Yet everything they represented had shifted. Across town, Evelyn Carter stood on the balcony of her suite, a cup of black coffee warming her palms. The city stretched below her orderly and indifferent. Palm trees cast long shadows on empty sidewalks. Somewhere beyond the horizon, aircraft lifted into the sky one after another, following invisible paths she now partially owned. Her phone vibrated once. She glanced at the screen. Internal review initiated. Preliminary findings attached. Evelyn exhaled slowly and set the phone down without opening the file. She knew what it would say. She had lived long enough to recognize patterns before they fully revealed themselves. She turned back inside and dressed simply the same way she always did. Dark slacks, a clean blouse. No jewelry beyond a watch that measured time more accurately than most people measured truth. By the time Robert arrived at the North Sky Regional Office, the sun was fully up. The building was modest for an aviation company of its scale. Clean lines. Neutral glass. No grandeur. It had been designed to signal competence, not dominance. Robert stood outside for a moment before going in. He straightened his shirt, then stopped himself. Old habits. He let it fall as it was, and stepped inside. The receptionist looked up. Her smile faltered when she recognized him. "Captain Hale," she said, then hesitated. "Mr. Hale." "That's fine," Robert replied. She handed him a visitor badge without comment. The conference room was already occupied. Michael Reeves sat at one end of the table tablet in front of him. Linda Moore sat along the side, hands folded tightly in her lap. Daniel Brooks stood near the window looking out, shoulders tense. Robert took the empty seat. No one spoke at first. Michael cleared his throat. "This isn't a hearing," he said. "It's a conversation." Robert nodded. Understood. Michael tapped his tablet, and the screen behind him lit up with footage. A grainy angle from the jet's interior. The aisle, the leather seat, Robert's own figure standing over Evelyn. Robert watched himself speak without sound, watched his posture, his certainty. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Michael paused the video. "Captain Hale, what do you see here?" Robert did not answer immediately. "I see a man who thought he was maintaining order." "And what else?" Michael pressed. "I see a man who didn't ask enough questions." Linda finally spoke, her voice tight. "You shut me down." Robert turned toward her. She met his eyes unflinching. "Yes," he said. "I did." Daniel looked away. Michael nodded slowly. "This review isn't about blame alone. It's about patterns. Captain Hale, you've been flagged before." Robert's chest tightened. "For what?" "Nothing that rose to formal discipline," Michael said. "But there were notes, comments, crew feedback." Linda inhaled sharply. Michael continued. Words like rigid, dismissive, unapproachable. Robert absorbed each word like a physical blow. He had never thought of himself that way. He had thought of himself as demanding, exacting, necessary. Evelyn entered without announcement. The room rose instinctively, then hesitated, unsure of the etiquette now. "Please," she said, gesturing for them to sit. "Let's not pretend hierarchy answers everything." She took the seat at the head of the table, not because it was symbolic, but because it was practical. She opened her phone and finally skimmed the report. "Robert," she said, looking up, "do you know why I didn't fire you last night?" He shook his head. "Because you wanted process." "That's part of it," she said. "But mostly because I wanted to see what you would do today." And he asked. "And you showed up," she replied. "That matters." She turned to Linda. "You spoke up when you could." Linda swallowed. "I tried." "And you stayed," Evelyn said. "That also matters." To Daniel, she said, "You flew the plane. Quietly. Correctly. You didn't exploit the moment." Daniel nodded, unsure what to do with the praise. Evelyn folded her hands. "This company is about to change. Not cosmetically. Fundamentally." She looked directly at Robert. "You can be part of that change, or you can become an example of why it was necessary." Robert felt his throat tighten. "What does being part of it require?" "Humility," Evelyn said. "And work." Michael leaned forward. "Captain Hale will be placed on mandatory leave pending completion of a behavioral and decision-making program," he said. "This isn't a box check. It's intensive." Robert nodded once. "I'll do it." Linda watched him, carefully searching his face for defensiveness. She found none. Evelyn stood. "Good. Because this isn't about punishment. It's about preventing the next failure." She paused at the door, then turned back. "One more thing." They waited. "The seat you told me to leave," she said, her voice calm, "was never about leather or position. It was about visibility. Who we allow to be seen. Who we decide belongs." She let the words settle. "That decision," she continued, "is made every day in this industry. Quietly, repeatedly, by people who believe they are simply maintaining order." Her gaze returned to Robert. Order is only useful if it serves reality. When she left, the room felt lighter and heavier all at once. Michael gathered his tablet. "We'll be in touch," he said to Robert. Daniel lingered. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I hope you come back." Robert nodded. "So do I." Outside, the sun climbed higher. The day moved on, indifferent to personal reckonings. Robert stood alone in the parking lot, visitor badge still clipped to his shirt, watching a small plane lift into the sky. He felt the familiar pull in his chest, the instinct to be up there, to belong to the air. This time he did not assume he deserved it. He would have to earn it again. 3 weeks later, the training room smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner, the kind of neutral space designed to make difficult conversations unavoidable. Robert Hale sat at a rectangular table with 6 other pilots, different ages, different airlines, different histories. The only common thread was the reason they were there. A screen at the front displayed a simple title, Decision Integrity and Human Factors. The facilitator, a woman in her early 50s with calm eyes and a voice that carried without effort, did not introduce herself with credentials. She didn't need to. Today, she said, we're not talking about flying. We're talking about judgment. Robert felt the word land. Judgment. Not skill. Not hours logged. Judgment. She played the first clip without warning. It was the cabin footage again. Robert's own voice filled the room, crisp and certain. "Ma'am, I need you to switch seats, now." A murmur moved through the group. Someone shifted in their chair. Another pilot crossed his arms. The facilitator paused the video. "What's the risk factor here, Silence?" Finally, a man near the end of the table spoke. "Escalation." Why, the facilitator asked. "Because the authority challenge wasn't safety-based," the man replied. "It was social." Robert stared at the table. The facilitator nodded. "Good. What else?" A woman across from Robert leaned forward. "Confirmation bias." He saw what he expected to see. The facilitator looked at Robert. Captain Hale. All eyes turned. Robert felt his pulse quicken, then steady. He lifted his head. "I assumed I was right before I verified," he said. "And once I assumed, everything else became noise." The facilitator held his gaze. "And what did that cost you?" Robert swallowed. "Trust." She nodded. "From whom?" "Everyone," he said, "including myself." The room went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not accusatory. Attentive. Over the following days, the sessions dug deeper. Case studies, role reversals, scenarios designed to unsettle muscle memory. Robert found himself stripped of the familiar markers of competence. No uniforms, no call signs, just decisions and consequences laid bare. At night, he returned to his apartment and sat alone with the discomfort. He replayed moments he had long dismissed. A junior officer he had ignored, a flight attendant he had silenced, a passenger he had categorized too quickly. He began to understand that experience left unexamined could rot into arrogance. Across the country, Evelyn Carter sat in a different kind of room. The boardroom at North Sky headquarters was quiet, except for the hum of the projector. Charts lined the screen. Metrics, trends, feedback loops, the language of systems. "This is where the problem lives," Evelyn said, pointing not to a single data point, but to a pattern. Not in one pilot, not in one incident, in the assumptions we reward. A board member shifted. "We've always prioritized efficiency. And efficiency without awareness creates blind spots," Evelyn replied. "Blind spots kill people. She let the words settle. "We are revising training standards," she continued. "Promotion criteria, evaluation metrics. We will measure how decisions are made, not just whether flights arrive on time." Someone frowned. "That will slow operations." "Yes," Evelyn said calmly, "and it will save them." Later that afternoon, she walked the hangar floor unannounced. Mechanics looked up, surprised, then quickly returned to their work. She watched hands move over metal, careful, deliberate. She stopped beside a young technician struggling with a panel. "Take your time," she said. The technician blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "No," Evelyn corrected gently. "Just yes." He nodded and continued, shoulders easing. Back in the training room, the facilitator posed a final exercise. "You are the senior authority," she said. "A situation arises that does not fit the checklist." "What do you do?" One by one, the pilots answered. When it was Robert's turn, he took a breath. "I slow down," he said. "I ask someone else what they see, and I assume I'm missing something." The facilitator smiled faintly. "That's a start." On the last day, she pulled Robert aside. "You didn't fight the process," she said. "That's rare." "I didn't know I was wrong," he replied. "That's worse." She nodded. "What will you do differently if you return?" Robert did not answer immediately. "I'll treat uncertainty as information, not weakness." She extended her hand. "That's the point." Weeks later, an envelope arrived at Robert's door. Inside was a single page. "Review complete. Conditional reinstatement approved. Flight status pending supervised evaluation." Robert read it twice. He folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. Then he sat down and waited, forcing himself not to imagine the cockpit too soon. The call came 2 days later. Captain Hale Michael Reeves said, "We'd like you to report to Westchester tomorrow morning. Observation flight." "Understood," Robert replied. And Captain Michael added, "You won't be in the left seat." Robert smiled faintly. "I wouldn't expect to be." At the airport, dawn broke softly, mist hanging low over the tarmac. Robert arrived early visitor badge, replaced by a temporary credential marked evaluation. Linda Moore was already there. She looked up when she saw him. Their eyes met. "Good morning," Robert said. Linda studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Morning." They stood in silence, the weight of history between them. "I owe you more than an apology," Robert said quietly. Linda considered this. "You're showing up," she said. "That counts." Daniel Brooks joined them moments later. Uniform, crisp expression composed. "You ready?" Daniel asked. Robert nodded. "As I'll ever be." They walked toward the aircraft together. Robert felt the familiar pull again, the scent of fuel, the gleam of metal. But this time there was something else beneath it. Awareness. Fragile. Essential. As they boarded, Robert paused at the threshold and looked back once at the open sky. He did not step forward with certainty. He stepped forward with care. The cabin felt different this time, not quieter, but sharper, as if every sound had an edge. Robert took the right seat without being told. The evaluation badge clipped to his jacket caught the overhead light, a small square of plastic, that weighed more than any set of wings he had ever worn. Daniel settled into the left seat, hands relaxed, movements confident without being careless. Linda moved through the pre-flight with deliberate calm, calling out checks, her voice steady, her eyes attentive. "Cabin secure," she said. "Copy," Daniel replied. Robert listened. He did not rush to speak. He let the checklist unfold line by line, resisting the old urge to anticipate to finish sentences before they were spoken. The instruments glowed, patiently waiting. Outside, the morning mist thinned, revealing the runway stretching forward, long and unassuming. "Before start, checklist," Daniel said. Robert responded on cue, his voice measured. "Before start, checklist complete." Daniel glanced at him briefly. Not to assess, to acknowledge. The engine spooled a familiar vibration, filling the cockpit. Robert felt it in his chest, the old comfort stirring, tempered now by restraint. This was not a return. It was a test. As the aircraft taxied, a voice crackled through the headset. Ground control cleared them for departure. Daniel's hands moved with ease. Robert monitored cross-checked, noted small details he might once have ignored. A gauge settling a fraction slower than usual. A slight delay in a system response. "Everything within limits," Robert said. Daniel nodded. "Good catch." The words landed quietly, but they mattered. The takeoff was smooth, the aircraft lifting cleanly into the pale sky. Robert felt the weight shift, the earth fall away. He did not close his eyes. He stayed present, tracking each variable, resisting nostalgia. At cruising altitude, the cabin settled into its rhythm. Linda secured the galley, then paused at the cockpit door. "Coffee?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "Yes, please." She turned to Robert. "You?" Robert hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." She returned a few minutes later with 2 cups, placing Robert's gently on the console. Their fingers did not touch this time. They did not need to. As the flight progressed, Daniel invited Robert into the decision-making process, not out of obligation, but practice. Weather ahead, traffic patterns, minor reroutes. Robert offered input when asked, concise and clear, careful not to dominate. Hours passed. Somewhere over the Midwest, turbulence rippled through the cabin without warning. The aircraft shuddered lightly, then steadied. "Seatbelt sign on," Daniel said. Robert watched the radar. "It's narrow. Should pass quickly." Linda's voice came through the intercom, calm and reassuring. The cabin complied. The turbulence subsided as suddenly as it had arrived. Daniel exhaled. "Nice call." Robert nodded once, accepting the acknowledgement, without feeding on it. They descended toward their destination as afternoon light softened into amber. The landing was controlled precise. When the wheels touched down, the sound was clean, confident. After shutdown, the cockpit remained still for a moment longer than usual. "Well," Daniel said, removing his headset. "That went well." Robert removed his own, slowly. It did. Linda appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Passengers disembarking," she said. As the cabin emptied, Robert stayed seated, waiting. This time, no one told him where he belonged. Michael Reeves boarded shortly after, tablet under his arm. He surveyed the cockpit, then looked at Robert. "Walk with me," he said. They stepped onto the tarmac, the afternoon heat rising from the concrete. Michael stopped near the nose of the aircraft. "I've reviewed today's flight," he said. "Feedback from Daniel, from Linda." Robert waited. "You did what we asked," Michael continued. "You listened, you verified, you adjusted." "Yes," Robert said. Michael nodded. "Effective immediately, your flight status is reinstated. Conditional for now." But reinstated, Robert felt the words settle. Not relief, responsibility. "Thank you," he said. Michael studied him. "Don't thank me. Prove me right." He walked away, leaving Robert alone beneath the open sky. Evelyn Carter watched the scene from a distance, standing near a black sedan. Her posture relaxed, her expression thoughtful. She had arrived quietly, as she always did, preferring observation to announcement. Robert noticed her and approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "Miss Carter," he said. "Captain Hale," she replied. "Or would you prefer Robert?" "Robert is fine," he said. She nodded. "I heard the flight went well." "It did," he said. "Because people did their jobs." She smiled faintly. "That's usually why things work." He hesitated, then spoke. "I want you to know something. If I return to full command, it won't be the same as before." "I would hope not," Evelyn replied. "I won't confuse authority with certainty again," he said. "And if I do, I expect to be corrected." Evelyn met his gaze. "Correction only works if it's welcomed." "I welcome it," Robert said. She considered him for a moment, then extended her hand. He took it, her grip firm, unadorned. "Then we understand each other," she said. As she turned to leave, Robert watched her go, not with awe, not with fear, but with clarity. This was not redemption. It was alignment. Later, as Robert walked back toward the terminal, the sun dipping low, he felt the familiar pull of the sky once more. This time, it did not feel like entitlement. It felt like permission earned. And for the first time in a long career, that difference mattered. The news did not break with sirens or headlines, but it moved anyway, quiet and persistent, carried in conversations that started with, "Did you hear?" and ended with a pause. Robert felt it first in the way people looked at him. Not the open judgment he had expected. Something subtler, a recalibration. Mechanics nodded a beat longer. Dispatchers listened more closely. Pilots who once spoke over him now waited for him to finish. The company felt the shift, too. At North Sky headquarters, Evelyn stood at the edge of a glass-walled conference room, watching the board settle into their seats. No assistants hovered. No small talk filled the space. Just the low hum of the building and the faint echo of aircraft moving somewhere outside. She did not begin with the incident. She began with data. A screen lit up behind her, displaying charts that traced decisions across months, then years. Delays correlated with authority bottlenecks. Near misses clustered around unchecked assumptions. Complaints that never reached escalation because the source was deemed inconvenient. This, Evelyn said, pointing not to a single spike, but to a pattern, is what complacency looks like when it wears confidence. A board member shifted. "Are we attributing this to one event?" "No," Evelyn replied. "We're using one event to expose a system." She changed the slide. Crew feedback, anonymous, unfiltered. I didn't feel safe speaking up. Decisions were already made before questions were asked. Authority mattered more than accuracy. The room stayed quiet. Evelyn turned away from the screen. Aviation does not fail because people lack skill. It fails because people stop listening. She let that settle. We will implement changes, she continued. Not optional, not cosmetic. Crew challenge protocols will be reinforced. Training will emphasize decision integrity over rank. Leadership evaluations will include behavioral audits. Someone cleared their throat. There will be resistance. Yes, Evelyn said calmly. There always is when accountability replaces comfort. Outside the room, life continued. Phones buzzed. Planes departed. Systems adjusted, slowly, reluctantly. On the line, Robert felt those adjustments in real time. A routine flight out of Chicago ran late when a junior first officer flagged an anomaly in a sensor reading. Years ago, Robert might have overridden it, trusted his experience, pushed through. This time he leaned back and asked, "Walk me through what you're seeing." The delay cost them 12 minutes. The issue resolved itself without incident. When they landed, the first officer exhaled. "Thanks for taking me seriously." Robert nodded. "Thanks for speaking up." The words were simple. The impact was not. Linda noticed it, too. The way Robert listened now. The way he waited. The way his authority no longer needed volume. One evening as they stood near the galley after a flight, Linda said quietly, "You're different." Robert considered that. "I hope so. People notice," she said. "Good," he replied. "They should. Not everyone welcomed the change." A senior pilot cornered Robert in the crew lounge one afternoon. "You really think all this sensitivity stuff makes us safer?" Robert met his gaze. "I think ignoring information makes us dangerous." The pilot scoffed. "We flew just fine before." "So did people without seatbelts," Robert said evenly. The man walked away unconvinced. Robert did not chase him. At home, the changes were quieter, but deeper. Robert found himself replaying conversations, not to defend his position, but to examine it. He caught assumptions as they formed and questioned them before they hardened. It was exhausting and necessary. Across the organization, Evelyn watched metrics shift. Small improvements at first, a dip in near-miss reports, then an increase. Not because incidents rose, but because reporting did. Transparency was a lagging indicator of trust. One afternoon, she stood in the hangar again, watching a crew prepare an aircraft for departure. A young mechanic paused, frowned at a component, then called over a supervisor. They talked. They adjusted. They delayed the flight. No one yelled. Evelyn smiled faintly. Later that week, she met with Robert in her office. No desk between them, just 2 chairs and a window overlooking the runway. "I'm getting mixed feedback," she said. "About me?" Robert asked. "About everything," she replied. "Some people think we're overcorrecting." "And you?" he asked. "I think systems resist change until they realize it's inevitable," Evelyn said. She studied him. "How are you holding up?" Robert considered the question. "It's harder than flying ever was." "Good," she said. "If it were easy, it wouldn't matter." He nodded. "There's something else?" She waited. "I used to believe respect came from certainty," Robert said. Now I see it comes from curiosity. Evelyn leaned back. That realization alone justifies the discomfort. Outside, a jet lifted into the air, climbing steadily invisible forces, holding it aloft. The media eventually caught on. A trade publication ran a small piece. North Sky Aviation introduces new leadership evaluation standards following internal review. No names, no drama. But in comments and forums, pilots talked. Stories surfaced, quiet acknowledgements, hesitant hope. One post stood out. I spoke up on a flight last week and wasn't shut down. That's new. Evelyn read it twice. At the end of the month, she addressed the company in a recorded message. No script, no teleprompter. Trust is built in moments you think no one is watching, she said. Our goal is not perfection. It's awareness. If you feel uncertain, speak. If someone challenges you, listen. If you're wrong, adjust. She paused. The sky doesn't crave about our pride. Robert watched the message later alone in his apartment. He felt a strange mix of gratitude and resolve. He thought of the first time he had told Evelyn to move. How certain he had been. How wrong. He thought of the young first officer in Chicago. Of Linda's quiet observation. Of Daniel's steady hands. Change had not come like a storm. It had come like pressure applied slowly, reshaping what could no longer remain rigid. The next morning, Robert boarded another flight. Routine. Unremarkable. As he settled into the cockpit, he looked out at the runway, long and open, stretching forward. He did not feel like he was reclaiming something lost. He felt like he was becoming someone new. And this time, he understood that the most dangerous assumption in the sky was believing you had nothing left to learn. The runway lights blurred slightly as dusk settled in the kind of hour where day and night negotiated quietly, neither fully in control. Robert Hale guided the aircraft down with a steady hand, the city unfolding beneath them in measured geometry. He felt no rush, no hunger for affirmation, just alignment. The jet responded as it always had, but this time he listened to it differently. Every vibration, a conversation rather than a command. When the wheels touched down, the landing was clean, unremarkable, exactly as it should be. In the cabin, passengers barely noticed. They gathered their belongings, checked their phones, stood when the aisle cleared. Another flight completed. Another arrival logged. Nothing to mark the moment, except what it meant to the people who understood its weight. Linda stood near the door, greeting passengers as they disembarked. She caught Robert's eye briefly as he stepped out of the cockpit, just a fraction of a smile passing between them. Not forgiveness, not approval, recognition. Daniel remained behind for a moment, running through post-flight checks. "Good work today," he said without ceremony. Robert nodded. "You too." Outside, the evening air carried the distant sound of engines, starting and stopping a living system in constant motion. Evelyn Carter stood near the edge of the tarmac, hands in her coat pockets, watching another aircraft taxi past. She had not come to evaluate. She had come to observe the after-effects. Robert approached and stopped beside her, leaving space. "It's holding," he said. "Yes," Evelyn replied. Systems always reveal themselves after the pressure lifts. They stood in silence for a moment, the lights reflecting off polished metal, the world continuing around them. "I didn't change the company alone," she said. "You know that." "I do," Robert replied. "But you allowed it to change." Evelyn glanced at him. "I removed obstacles. People chose what to do with the space." Robert thought of the first officer who had spoken up, of Linda finding her voice, of the quiet shift that had rippled outward without fanfare. "I used to think leadership meant preventing chaos," he said. "Now I think it means letting truth surface before chaos is required." Evelyn nodded. That lesson costs less when learned early. They walked toward the terminal together, then parted ways without ceremony. No grand gestures, no closing speeches. Later that night, Robert sat alone in his apartment city lights, reflecting faintly against the window. He placed his cap on the shelf, not with reverence, not with resentment, but with clarity. It was a tool, a symbol, not an identity. On his table lay a copy of the updated training manual, its pages marked with notes and margins filled. Decision integrity, crew challenge protocols, language that once would have felt like intrusion, now read as necessity. He thought of the day he had told a woman to move because she disrupted his sense of order. How small that certainty felt now, how fragile. Across the city, Evelyn opened her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating the quiet room. She reviewed a final report, then closed it without saving changes. The work was ongoing. It always would be. She paused, catching her reflection in the darkened glass. A woman who had learned long ago that power did not announce itself, that the most consequential shifts often happened in silence. Outside, a plane climbed into the night sky, its lights blinking steadily as it disappeared into cloud. The system held, and because it held, people were safer, voices were heard, and assumptions had less room to hide. Stories like this rarely make headlines. They unfold in training rooms, in quiet decisions, in moments where someone chooses to listen instead of assert. But they matter because they reshape the spaces we all move through without thinking. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to show your support by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment with 3 simple words. Share your thoughts.